Welcome to Evolve to Succeed, the podcast that brings together business owners, leaders and experts to talk about their business journeys and provide them with invaluable insights and explore the link between personal and business success. I am your host, Warren Munson, founder of Evolve. I have previously founded, grown and successfully exited 3 businesses in the business services and technology sectors. I have a passion for helping and advising businesses and seeing them succeed. We all know that leading and running a business comes with its own unique joys and challenges, and Evolve provides the advice, guidance and support to the business, you and your teams on that journey, be that if you're starting, growing or looking to exit or step away from your business. We do this through our Ignite, Thrive and Optimise programs and services, which include strategic advice, coaching and mentoring, leadership training, funded business support and so much more. If you want to learn more about Evolve, then please do go to evolveadvisory.co.uk or connect and message me on LinkedIn. For now though, let's just get on with the show. Today, we're at Wimborne Town Football Club to record an Evolve to Succeed podcast with Jimmy Glass. Jimmy Glass is notorious for that goal in 1999 that kept Carlisle in the Football League. He had a career as a goalkeeper, making over 160 professional appearances. But what I wanted to talk to Jimmy about was not that football career, although clearly we touched on it during the course of the conversation, but more about what life has been like for him since, how he's changed his life, how he's endeavoured to forge a career outside of football, only for football to drag him back in. We hear all about that, his experiences with Eddie Howe, and also now his life at Wimborne Town Football Club. Jimmy is an open and honest individual and character, and therefore there's lots of value in this conversation for all of us that lead and own businesses. Welcome, Jimmy, to the Evolve to Succeed podcast.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Going to have a conversation today about your life as a professional footballer, but more importantly, perhaps for our listeners, things that have happened to you in your life since and the lessons that you've learned along the way. But for our listeners, we should probably put in context your professional career. So tell us a little bit about your career as a professional goalkeeper, Jimmy.
See, that's an interesting one because I was from the moment I left school at 15. Probably for 13 years, I was involved professionally with the game. Started at Crystal Palace as a YTS apprentice back in 1989. Palace at the time were actually quite a good team. They're
riding high at the time, weren't they?
Righty, Wright and Bright, Steve Coppell was the manager. They were doing really well. So I immediately went into a successful environment. Now, when I mean successful, they weren't obviously Man United, but they'd gone from what would now be the Championship into what is now the Premier League. So from the old second division to first division. So the club was on a high. Football was very different back then. The facilities were very different. The coaching was everything was very different about football back in the late 80s, early 90s. It was obviously the invention of Premier League, which and then the Sky money, which really created football as you know it today. But even still, very competitive environment. You had to be strong mentally. Probably was a greater asset to be strong mentally than probably technically proficient in those days.
And that's just because of the nature of the game and the way you were managed and...
Yeah, exactly. And the characters in the game. And this is probably the European world influx of players.
Yeah.
So this is old English type
It's old school British football, yeah. Isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and I grew up in a Palace. We had a real strong mentality team. We then had an influx of ex-Crazy Gang Wimbledon players coming into the dressing room.
That would have made a difference.
It did, yeah, because anyone knows the old Wimbledon story, it was a really interesting story. And a very small Southern League club that went all the way to the top. Probably the ultimate was winning the FA Cup final in '88. But they did that in a way that was different to other teams. And so the likes of Eric Young came into a dressing room, Andy Thorne, Mark Dennis at left. Yeah, real characters, big characters that grew up in that Crazy Gang environment. So it was kind of a baptism of fire.
Yeah. And how do you survive in that environment as a 17, 18-year-old?
Well, ultimately I was 15 at the time when I left school, and then, in truth, and this is the crux of my career, I I don't think I really made the most of my ability. It sounds a bit sort of big-headed, but my ability was greater than my success as a goalkeeper.
Yeah.
I think the truth of the matter was and what we would call mental health nowadays, and my self-belief and self-confidence wasn't what I showed it to be. I had to create a bit of a character.
Yeah.
I'm quite a sensitive character at heart, and I had to create a character to be able to compete and survive in that environment.
And I've heard you say this, and it was one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, was that you talk about, as an individual, we all see you if we've been to the hospitality or now at Wimborne Town, or, your character, you're full of confidence as an individual. But you always say that confidence never served you was never there, or never felt like it was there on a football pitch. Yeah,
I think there's a difference between knowing you can do something and being confident.
Yeah.
I think as a young man, I just didn't understand myself at all, and didn't understand what psychology was. I had no idea.
And the game at that stage didn't have those characters in it to help you establish that.
Do you know what? I never had in the 13 years as a professional goalkeeper, I had about 18 months of goalkeeping training. That's the stand, and that's training. We're not even talking about coaching. We're not talking about what you get nowadays. I'm talking about someone just having enough balls to throw them to you and give you a workout. The game was very backward by today's standards, and I think I played on natural ability pretty much all of my career, just natural ability, which took me to a level and to a point. I think my point was championship, took me to that kind of level in modern day standards. And then the pressures of being a goalkeeper within a tough industry started to kind of show, and the cracks started to appear in my psychology, in my mindset. Yeah. And that's when my career started to go downwards. And it took me a long time to sit and reflect on that. When I stepped away from football, and we'll talk about that in a bit.
We will, definitely.
But it took me a long time to understand that when I was younger, I needed the support and the someone to help me develop my mindset, to give me that confidence. Yeah. But that's, again, that could be said of many footballers, I'm sure. And it's crazy, really, for me. And I'm sure at some point we'll talk about a certain goal, but it's crazy for me really to look back at my career and think, well, actually, I feel like I failed, but I do. The truth of the matter is, I didn't make the most of. And
that's not because you feel like that sense of failure is that you don't feel you fulfilled your potential.
Yeah, definitely. I don't sit back and regret it now, but I know I didn't fulfill my potential, and I think that's probably the same for many people, and not just in football, in life, in business, in whatever. You can look back and reflect and think, well, did I make the most of myself, and why didn't I? And
it is quite interesting, like you say, in business and in life, quite a few people get out of the starting blocks quite quickly, don't they, and then start to kind of plateau, and then
football. I'm going to use football as an example. In those days, there was strength of character, but then it was a more open game and ability as well, and I think the modern footballer is a very different animal. The modern footballer doesn't get anywhere near, with the very few exceptions, doesn't get anywhere near the top flight if they haven't secured their mentality, if they haven't been able to condition themselves mentally to be able to take what it is they're trying to do. The mindset of being a footballer nowadays is very different. You've got to be strong mentally, and you've got to be professional, for want of a better word, from a very early age. Yeah. Whereas when I was young and the football I played in, that wasn't the case.
We can obviously talk about Wimborne Town, but it's probably a good reflection point to think about. Does that now, those experiences, reflect into how you're the general manager, you're not the football manager of the club, but does that reflect in how perhaps you want to see the club, react and deal with its own kind of trainees and academy players?
Listen, very much so. And even to give you an example, we've got a young academy here in terms of it's only been going a couple of years, and they've been struggling a little bit with their football, the football side of it. And I actually took it upon myself on Saturday to go onto the pitch before their game. I was in my wellies trying to sponge the main pitch to get our game against
Melbourne. It's a glamorous life you lead.
It was, yeah. But I knew I'd moved them from Blandford, where they were playing their home games, which is another story altogether. But they had a game on Saturday morning on the 3G. Now our academy hasn't been having great results, and I've been watching them thinking, well, it's not a footballing thing, so it must be a mindset thing. So what I've learned over the years, I'll be honest, I've probably learned more about life sat in my taxi for 13 years than I ever did as a footballer, or probably since. What I've learned is you control that side of yourself. You can manage your mindset. You know, there are elements of life and sport you cannot control. You can do your best to prepare yourself to overcome adversity or whatever it is you're trying to achieve. But your mindset is something you actually control. And I pulled the lads on Saturday morning, and I thought, well, that's the difference. That's the difference.
That's what's lacking.
Yeah, that's what's lacking. I told you might not win this game today. They were playing Hamworthy, actually. And that was irrelevant. It wasn't like it was a local derby or I thought about it. I said, you might not win this game today, but there are elements of this game you can control. And that's something that I've heard people say now over the years, and especially the 8 years I had at AFC Bournemouth, because that was a very different world.
Yeah.
The world that Eddie Howe created and the world I went back to work in.
Yeah.
And the truth of the matter was I was a long way out of football and probably never thought I'd get back into football, but watching what Ed was creating and the way he was doing it inspired me to know that actually...
Dragged you back.
Well, it's being done the right way now.
Yeah.
And that's so, in terms of Wimborne Town, the reason I took this job, there are a few varied reasons I took this job, but one of them was that I suppose the autonomy of being able to install now my understanding of what gives you success. And there are elements that you control.
Yeah.
There are elements that you can actually... And what you find is, and the crazy thing is you find if you control the elements you can control, you'll find the success is just around the corner, because the little bits aren't actually that difficult to then overcome.
Yeah. Well, it's such a, because it does that mindset piece, that doing what you can do, being the best version of yourself when you show up every day, that probably is 80% of the job, isn't it?
The reality is now, and and this is, again, I'd always say, it's everything in life. It doesn't matter whether you're a footballer or you're working in Tesco's. It doesn't matter what you want to do with your life. If you become or try to become, do you know what? It goes into relationships. Yeah. It's how you become a parent. If you try to, no, not try. We don't want to sound like Yoda. You either do or do not. There is no try. If you manage your mindset to be the best version of yourself, and of course you're going to have down days, and you're not going to be able to do it all the time, but you keep going with that mindset and that goal. And if you become the best version of yourself, you will be successful. Yeah. And when we talk about success, we're not talking about whatever it is, whether it's money you want, whether it's friends you want, whether it's just peace of mind, whether it's physical strength and conditioning. Yeah. And whether it's the greatest marriage in the world, you do get to choose.
Yeah. Serendipity plays a part, though, doesn't it?
Well, it does. Yeah, of course, of course.
And probably did it with your career. And I suppose what I'm really interested about is that in that time as a professional footballer, you played for a number of clubs, and you would have seen. I know it was very old school, and I would love to have a chat about Eddie Howe, and we'll do that further into the conversation, but even in those days, you played under a variety of different personalities, managers, leadership styles, ways of motivating players and perhaps demotivating players at the same time. I mean, what have you taken from those experiences into life? Some of the positive and some of the negatives, or is that all behind you now?
No, it's a good question, a good point. And I was lucky from the start that I worked with Steve Coppell at Palace from a distance, because he was the first team manager. But back in those days, even at 15, I was training with the first team at times. As a young apprentice, they might have 3 goals or they have a shooting goal, so I'll be pulled across from the youth team. I was very fortunate in my time at Palace to have a lot of interaction with the first team players and the first team, clean their boots for one thing. But also from a training point of view, and Steve Coppell to me was a fantastic manager. He was an introvert in many ways, but when he said something, it mattered. Right. He was a very intelligent man, and I love working with Steve. Unfortunately, my time at Palace, and I picked up an injury. I played in the youth team, not the first year because I had an August birthday, which meant I had 3 seasons in the youth team, and my first year, another young keeper called Andy Woodman, who's now the Bromley manager. He played, but then that meant that I went out on loan to Dulwich Hamlet at 16.
Right.
You know, I was playing Isthmian Premier League at 16.
Yeah.
Which was obviously a
Proper men's
higher,
non-league
proper men's football. Yeah, it was a higher standard and a harder standard than the youth team.
Yeah.
But I went to Dudley Hamlet for half the season. I wouldn't say I was spectacular there, but it did teach me a lot about how to be strong in a game, physically, verbally. My ability carried me through, I suppose, on top of a mental strength, but my ability carried me through. And that was a great learning curve, because the season after I was in the youth team. And then my last year in the youth team, we ended up winning the South East County Division 2, and then it got to the FA Youth Cup final against a team of 92. So I played in that final against Man United. So my time in the youth team at Palace was excellent and really good. Now the training facilities were horrendous. You know, that side of it was poor. We didn't really have a goalie coach. Peter Bonetti come in occasionally to do a bit of coaching, but we had a youth team manager in Alan Smith, not the Arsenal centre forward, the old Fulham manager, who he'd broke his leg when he was a young footballer, and he went off and made a successful business in sportswear. But the beauty of Alan was he loved a holiday. So in the youth team at Palace, we went everywhere. We went Spain, France, Portugal, Italy, Germany. We had more trips than the first team, you know. And so my youth career at Palace was I was very, very fortunate. Yeah. The problem I had at Palace was that they signed after they got beat 9-0 at Anfield, which seems to be a common thread, because I was at Bournemouth when they got beat 9-0 at Anfield. So at that point I stepped away, thinking I was a Jonah. They signed Nigel Martin from Bristol Rovers, first £1 million goalkeeper.
Yeah.
And Nigel Martin was just exceptional. He was an exceptional goalkeeper. So my pathway into the Palace first team just stopped. I'd picked up an injury in my last year in the youth team as well. I fractured both my scaphoids, which ultimately meant I didn't play for 20 months.
So that's the bone in your hand, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's quite a common goalkeeper injury, but breaking them both 4 months apart is very uncommon. And they didn't pick it up to start with, so my last year I finished kind of with... The FA Youth Cup game, I finished with 2 broken wrists and a broken finger at Old Trafford, so that's quite an interesting story.
That's a claim to fame of sorts.
It is, but then I didn't play for about 20 months, got back fit again, got number 2 in the Premier League behind Nigel.
Yeah.
Things were looking good for me, and then tore a cartilage and didn't play for 4 months. My Palace career, unfortunately, just got hindered by injuries in the end.
Yeah.
And Nigel to a degree, but I would have been quite happy at 21 to have been sat behind him for a period.
Watching, learning.
Yeah, essentially, yeah, because again, he was an exceptional character and goalkeeper. So when I got fit again and they had to bring in a more experienced number 2, you know, I found myself down the pecking order and I asked to leave. And at this point, Dave Bassett was a manager. Nothing against Dave. I went in one day, I think the second day after he arrived, and just said, "Look, Dave, nothing against you, but I need to play football." And literally a day after that, I was driving down to Bournemouth.
Okay.
Literally, they'd obviously shown interest in me, and that took me down to Bournemouth. In at the time, it was I suppose it was the 3rd division.
Yeah.
And then that teleported me into a whole new world of football. You know, it's like I like to refer to it as it's like going from London City to the old Wild West.
Yeah.
You know, where it was just you had 3 training balls, and Mel Machin as a manager was a very interesting character for anyone that ever remembers Mel. And it was, but I went there to play.
Yeah, just want to get back.
I wanted to play league football. I wanted to play league football. You get to a point, I was probably 22, 23, where you just have to play league football. Yeah. Certainly as a goalkeeper. And that's what brought me to Bournemouth. And
you did 90-odd appearances, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think in the league, I think 99 maybe in the league, obviously cup games as well. And even though I from very early on, Mel and me were going to clash. Yeah. Because I wasn't the easiest person to manage as well, because I was quite emotional. And I didn't like unfairness or my perception of unfairness. So if a goal would go in and I didn't think it was my fault, and I could have been wrong at times as well, openly now when you look back at your arguments you've had. You know, Mel, but funny story, Ian Andrews, who was the goalkeeper before I signed, quite a famous goalkeeper, Ian Andrews, played for Celtic and Southampton. His wife was unfortunately poorly, so he was having to step away from football. But I had one training session with him down at Chapelgate, I think the day I arrived. And afterwards, we were in the car park, and he shook my hand and said, I wish you all the best, Jimmy. They're a good bunch of lads. Obviously, the old cliches. He said, I will tell you one thing. And he was talking about Mel Machin. He went, he hates goalkeepers. And,
it just fills you with confidence.
It does,
doesn't it?
Here we go. We're now, and that was probably, my relationship with Mel was fractious, really. So, but I played a lot of games with Bournemouth, and I love Bournemouth as a town. I never thought I'd leave London. You never do when you grow up really in London. You don't think the world exists outside London. But Bournemouth as a town was fantastic. A couple of lads followed me down from Palace, Ian Cox, Jamie Vincent.
Yeah.
I lived with Jamie. He sadly passed. I think it's last year. But it was some great times at Bournemouth.
Yeah.
And big characters like Fletch, Matty Holland was a captain, Steve Robinson, Steve Jones. It was a funny place because the old Dean Court, anyone remembers it?
Yeah, it was corrugated shed, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. You used to see people like save their energy sometimes in games to try and run off the pitch quick enough to get into the shower first, just to get some hot water. So it was a very different place to the Vitality Stadium now.
But it did have some momentum, didn't it? Because you had all those young players. There was a spell where they were signing young players from the Premier League and the Championship and bring them to the club and trying to make something happen, I suppose.
Well, Mel was very renowned in the game. He played football. He was very close friends with Alex Ferguson. So he had some great contacts, and he would be able to get young players in to the club. So although Bournemouth never really succeeded in any way, I suppose the ultimate achievement was the 1998 or windscreen final at Wembley. Although it never really achieved any ways, a lot of good young players come through Bournemouth. You think of, even the ones, you think of Rio Ferdinand who come in on loan. Obviously Jermaine Defoe. There were really good players coming into the Bournemouth setup, and it was a good time to play for Bournemouth.
Yeah. And clearly, career then moved on. You left Bournemouth. You ended up at Swindon Town. I probably think it's probably about time we did discuss that goal. So it was only recently that I learned you weren't at Carlisle that season for long, were you? So for our listeners, perhaps I'll leave it to you, Jimmy, to tell the story.
Well, I left, but I knew I signed 2.5 year contract for Bournemouth, and after about probably 2 months of dealing with Mel, I knew I probably wouldn't sign another one, either by choice or he really wouldn't want me to. So I was then left in the summer without contract, and it kind of summer was dragging on a bit, and then I think it's the summer of probably 98, I think, after the windscreen final. And then Swindon Town come in for me, and they offered me a 4-year deal. Now Swindon were a championship side equivalent at the time. Steve McMahon was a manager, and I thought, well, yeah, wonderful. And I went to see Steve, and he said, look, I've been keeping tabs on you at Bournemouth, really impressed, we want you to sign. So I went to Swindon really hopeful, and straight from the start, it just didn't kick in for me, really. I thought I was going to play. I played a lot of the pre-season games. Did well, I thought. I think I conceded 1 goal. But then Steve had other plans. He had another keeper there, Frank Talia, that he'd been injured the season before, and he wanted to play Frank at the start of the season. And it kind of knocked me back a little bit, because, like I say, we'd finished Bournemouth at all the troubles off the pitch at the time for Bournemouth. We were quite successful in the end on the pitch. So I was looking forward to kind of making a step up. It didn't quite work for me to start with at Swindon. And that continued really at Swindon. And then Steve eventually got sacked, and then Jimmy Quinn come in. I thought there'd be a good connection because of the Bournemouth connection with Jimmy Quinn. Phenomenal centre forward, Jimmy Quinn, one of the best centre forwards, probably old British type forwards you'd have got. But from a managerial point of view, I didn't really. Well, I'm going to try and be polite here. He probably wasn't as good as he was a centre forward. Let's put it that way. So it just didn't work out for me. And then towards the end of the 98-99 season, we had about 3 weeks to go.
Yeah,
it'd been a horrendous season for me. I'd got in a team at times and then got injured, or the team was poor. They were struggling in the league. It just wasn't working out. And I think it was a Tuesday, about 3 weeks to go. And basically he called me in his office and he said, look, Carlisle have come in for you to go on loan. And I said, well, it's after the deadline. He went, yeah, they've got special permission to take you on loan. Do you want to go? And my initial reaction was, yeah, I want to go.
Okay.
I just want to go and play football. Because that's all I wanted to do, just go and play football.
Send me up north, here I go.
Well, I knew Carlisle where it was because I've been there for Bournemouth, and we'd gone there on the bus once and got thumped 4-0, and what a horrendous journey back that is when you get thumped 4-0 at Carlisle. So 8 hours back. We then went the previous season with Bournemouth when we were on a high, and we actually flew up at the time. I think the club had chartered a plane and some fans paid for tickets, and we flew up and beat them 1-0 and flew back down. We was in the nightclub.
Sounds like the glory days.
It was. We were in a nightclub by about 10 o'clock. It was unbelievable. That was the only time we ever flew anywhere with Bournemouth in those days, trust me. So I basically got back in my car and I drove to London. I had to go to London to get some bits because I was going in between Swindon and London and Bournemouth at the time, where my girlfriend lived at the time. I was kind of doing a triangle during the week. So I was driving back to London, phoned my dad and said, look, Dad, I'm going to Carlisle on loan. He went, oh, okay, son. Anyway, put the phone down, carry on driving down the M4. He phones me back. He says, you do realise where they are, don't you? I went, yeah, they're up north. He went, no. He said, you realise that they're at the bottom of the 4th division or 3rd division at the time, in a relegation battle with Scarborough. I went, no, I didn't realise that. So essentially, I've now catapulted myself without thinking, because I love football as a game and I love playing it. But I didn't really follow the tables. I didn't really know what team was where. I wouldn't say I'm a passionate lover of football, all the tactical, technical, statistical elements of it. I just love the game, and I love the two boxes. You know, in all honesty, my psyche was just in it for the glory. You know, I needed the glory, I suppose. That was why.
It was the adrenaline and
it was, and I don't mind saying that, because there are many reasons people are in football or play sport. Glory's not a bad one. No. Obviously, it does leave you a bit short when you don't
always achieve.
Glory, but you know, it's not a bad thing to search after sometimes. So I had no idea, and I just went, okay, fine, and I wanted to play football.
Yeah, and
basically that afternoon, Nigel Pearson called me. It was his first job in football as a manager. He called me in a very short conversation. He said, look, are you up for it, son? I went, yep. He went, right, you'll do for me. And it was that. He said, I'll see you up here tomorrow. So I basically got in my car from London, drove to Carlisle, stayed overnight. Next day I drove up. So I was going to see him on the Thursday. So I was in for training on Thursday. And essentially, I've catapulted myself into a very big old football club that have been in the league for 71 years. You know, sleeping giant in some ways, Carlisle were at the time. And I've catapulted myself into probably their toughest, time in their history.
Battle for survival.
Yeah, essentially. And half the squad, or probably more than half the squad, were Cumbrians, young lads. Again, Nigel's first role in football, and I've catapulted myself into that. Now, my character is to go in all bolshy, or my perceived character, the one I created, Jimmy Glass character, is to go in all bolshy and not cocky's the wrong word, but try and be a bit louder. And
just pause there a minute. How different is the real Jimmy Glass to that persona?
I'm quite a sensitive character. That's what I'll say. I'm quite sensitive. I'm quite an emotional character.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't know, the emotions that I had from a young man, I struggled with, and I picked up a gambling habit towards the end of my well, actually, funny enough, when I was at Bournemouth, the old Royal Bath Casino, the Grosvenor there, I went in there one night, turned £40 into 104. This is good, isn't it?
This is what I can do.
This ain't bad. And it plagued me for many years. But that, and I'm not going to go too deep into addictions, because we can call it an addiction if you like, but for me it's a little bit more. There's more to it than that. You know, addictions feed on emotions.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say weak mentality, because it's not quite that simple. But they feed on emotions. And my understanding now, and it took me many years and a lot of looking at myself and understanding myself. And I went to GA and dealt with a psychologist at times. But my understanding of life now is that basically when people have addictions, they're symptoms for a bigger problem. And if you want to beat the addiction, you have to beat the problem.
Yeah.
And
you face it down.
Yeah, you have to look it in the eye, and that takes some doing. And sometimes you can only do that when you hit rock bottom. And if you've got a shed load of money and you never really hit rock bottom, it's very hard to overcome. But when your football career falls apart and you find yourself, driving a taxi, and there's nothing wrong with driving a taxi, by the way, but you find yourself driving, you have to look at your life and work out.
That's when the strength of character needs to kick in, doesn't
it?
Well,
then you look at yourself and you start to understand yourself, and you have to dig deep, and you have to understand your reasons and your triggers and why you do things the way you do. And I spent a whole decade doing that essentially while I was driving my taxi. And I'd never shy away from talking about it because I think it's an important element, because mental health is an important element of modern times. And the reality was I learned a lot about myself. Yeah. And probably my failings, why I didn't fulfil my football career, why I didn't fulfil my potential. But then going back to this character, that's why I created a character, because my emotions were quite fraught deep down.
So this facade came out.
Yeah, and this facade came out. And as I'm now older and you ask who the real Jimmy Glass is, I'm deep down, I'm probably a more calmer character than what you see if you're up in the hospitality rooms and I'm trying to make people laugh. Because all I'm actually trying to do in those rooms, and what I did with hospitality at Bournemouth, was I wanted to bring the changing room to the hospitality side. Because when people come to football ultimately at the end of the day is entertainment. Yeah. Now it's a business.
Yeah. But it's an entertainment business.
But it's an entertainment business. Yeah. And you, on the pitch, it's about success at the highest level. It's about winning. But also, once you get that right, it's about how you win. Yeah. And I wanted to. My first experience of the hospitality at Bournemouth, although it was much, 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 much better than what it was when I was a player, was that it was a bit starchy still. And people would come and pay a lot of money to then come into this football environment and be entertained. But that doesn't mean you can't be entertained while you're eating your roast chicken. No. And what you find, and what I find is, and the reason I do these things is because I can. I'm quite an emotional character, and you just pick up the emotions in a room and you just
feed off them.
Well, you manage them.
Yeah.
And that's what people want. People want to be entertained.
Definitely.
And there are people that sometimes can stand up and take the reins and go, okay, well, let's have some fun.
But clearly, the Jimmy that's sat in front of me now has learned how to switch on that personality, that bit of persona, and live day to day with who you really are.
Well, there's another side of me now I do that because I can, but there's a side of me that wants to be successful personally. And after 8 years at AFC Bournemouth, watching Eddie very close and seeing a transformation of a football club from afar initially, when I was driving my taxi, looking and go, Eddie Howe's got the job. Oh no, Eddie Howe's kept him up. And I remember Ed. I remember him as a young lad. I knew it was like as a character. And you think, how's he doing that? That's not Ed's character. But it was Ed's character, because Ed basically was a driven individual who aspired to be a better version of himself. Yeah. Always. And without giving away Ed's success and his secret too much, that's what Ed does.
That's his secret sauce.
It is. Ed doesn't sit back on his laurels. He wants to be the best version of himself. Yeah. And in order for him to do that, he needs to inspire everyone around him to do that. And sometimes you do that with a fist, and sometimes you do that with a kind word.
And then I'm fortunate probably only to have a couple of decent kind of conversations with Eddie, and that was probably one of the things that I took away, is he does want to be the best version of himself, and he's always listening to see how he can improve. But he installed that attitude throughout the club, didn't he? He wanted everybody within the club.
If you want to succeed, and this is really important to Ed, he needed people around him who wanted to be the best version of themselves as much as he wanted them to be the best version of themselves. Yeah. So with players, there's nothing more frustrating to Ed than someone not wanting to work as hard as he wanted them to work.
I can imagine that would be a frustration and anger point.
Yeah, because he would see, as a coach, his main skill is as a coach on the pitch. He's a football coach, and he can make players better. And that's what he does. That's what he did at AFC Bournemouth. That's why he had the success he had. The team that went up the first time was a very strong mentally team. There were partnerships all over the pitch. And then he's done the same at Newcastle. He's gone and took a team of talented players and just made them better. That's a very simplistic version of what he's done.
Yeah.
But in essence, it's the truth about him. And that's, again, it was that desire to get involved with that brought me back into football, because I was so far removed from it. And then when I came back into football, I knew that I would have to aspire to be the best version of myself, and I wouldn't make the same mistakes I made the first time around. So therefore, the opportunity I first had was to go in the lounge.
Yeah.
So I was going to go into the lounge and literally set it on fire if I could, because I wanted to make sure that...
It.
And I understood what Ed was trying to achieve. So I tried to implement what he was trying to do everywhere I could around the club. And then after a year, and then I went in as player liaison. And then after a year, I think Ed recognised that I got him. And he kind of set me loose on the rest of the club.
Because you'd been on that long journey yourself, hadn't you? So you probably did have empathy with who he was and what he wants to achieve, because you've been on that journey in that 13 years out of football.
Yeah, I recognised what he was doing, essentially. He realised, and when you take a club like AFC Bournemouth, that for decades, a century pretty much, had never really achieved anything. Sorry, Harry, I know you took me to the championship, and that's obviously there's moments.
But it was nearly 100 years of existing, wasn't it?
Yeah, I'm talking about a club, a club in itself becoming a Premier League. The thought AFC Bournemouth could ever become, to be fair, a solid championship team was unbelievable. And then suddenly they're moving up the championship, and they could have been the playoffs the first year, and then suddenly the second year they're hammering the league and they win the championship, and then they go into the Premier League, and then they stay up, which is like phenomenal achievement. Then the next season they finish ninth. It's just that it is a magical. And listen, lots of people have told this story, and it's everyone knows about the Bournemouth story, and it's a magical story, full of great characters, great characters. Big and Fletch. You got Neil Blake in there. You got Maxime. You got Jeff Mostyn. Great characters are part of that journey. But ultimately, it was Ed's drive.
Yeah.
His desire to be the best version of himself, and then implement that on whatever team represented him, the staff that represented him. Everyone had to tune into that mindset and that mentality. And I wanted to be part of that, because that's all them years in the taxi. That's what I realised.
That's what you were working towards, wasn't it?
Yeah, basically. So I think you asked me about the goal, and I've gone off on a tangent.
It's a good tangent to have gone on, Jimmy. But we should probably go back to that goal. So this is your third game, isn't it?
So basically, I'm at Carlisle. We're now 2 games into my loan spell. Scarborough had started to have a little winning run. We're down to the last game of the season. We had 2 draws. We drew with Darlington at home. I can see the 3 goals. Didn't play particularly brilliant. It wasn't horrendous, but mixed up with a defender for one of them. Went to Hartlepool, kept a clean sheet, 0-0. My memories are of that game, because it was one of Peter Beardsley's last games as a footballer, and I remember him hitting a free kick and I flipped it out the top corner. So that was quite a nice one
of those
moment.
memories to keep with you.
Just something that you think about over the years when you hear his name. But then we came down to the last game of the season, and it's at home, Brunton Park. It was the 8th of May 1999. I remember the sun was shining, it was blue skies. But being in Carlisle for the weeks commencing, and I'd come back after the game and go back up on a Wednesday of the previous games, and then do some training for a couple of days. Stayed in the hotel up by the M6. But my memories were that this massive club with all these fans, and they'd get good fans. There was over 10,000 in the ground for the last game of the season. I think officially they said 8, but there wasn't. There was many more. The whole town was resigned, because Carlisle were now bottom of the league. If Scarborough would have won, Carlisle were relegated. That's 71 years of Football League history. But there was a bigger thing at play, because the chairman at the time, Michael Knighton, remembered for juggling the ball up in front of Stretford End when he tried to buy Man United. And then it transpired he didn't have the money, but he did dress up in a full Man United kit. He was an interesting character, again one of the many interesting characters I've come across over the years. But the fans truly believed, because they'd released their profits for the season, or the year profits had been released just before that, and it was like £1.3 million profit. I think they were like the fourth
in
biggest.
1999
They were the fourth biggest profit, well, the fourth most profit of any football club in the country that year.
And they're bottom of the league.
And they're bottom of the bottom league, the bottom of the third division. And he'd sold pretty much all the talent during the last 6 months. And many fans believed, and this is just a belief, I'm not saying it's true or false, that he wanted the club to get relegated. He wanted to merge them with Berwick Rangers and take them into the Scottish League, so that he could then
build a super club in Scotland.
I mean, it's reasonably easy to get up into the Scottish Premier League at the time with a bit of money. So the fans were basically could see the end of their football club. And he had death threats and, all sorts from the fans. He asked for police protection on the final day, which they refused, which is quite interesting. So all that was surrounding the game as well. So on one hand, we had this game of football with this young squad, Nigel Pearson, young manager, a goalkeeper on loan from Swindon. It was all kind of building into this real emotional kind of finale. And then this Carlisle won a great team. They'd been struggling. They had some nice lads, good players, in terms of characters, but they weren't a great team, and we were playing Plymouth Argyle. They had nothing to play for. And the game, in all honesty, in some ways was a kind of a dull affair. Carlisle had a go by the way they could, but went 1-0 down to Lee Phillips. Ran from inside his own half and threw about 6 players and slotted in the bottom corner, which kind of summed up Carlisle as a team probably to a certain degree. That wouldn't sound too harsh. And then we get a goal back through the captain David Brightwell, and it's 1-1. I've got to say, Brights, it was a great goal. It was much better than mine as well. It was the most important goal on the day, yes, I know. So he puts one in from about 25 yards, which is great for you from your left-sided centre-half. So it came down essentially to the game was over. It's 1-1. Mm-hmm. The guy on the tannoy, a guy called Colin Carr, was going crazy down the tannoy, which I'm sure the FA frowned upon, but he was trying to... The game over in Scarborough had finished. They were 5 minutes behind. We were 5 minutes behind them because one of the Plymouth players, Gibbo, had broke his leg just before half-time. So we were 5 minutes behind. So it came down to the fact that the Scarborough game had finished 1-1. They were playing Peterborough, which meant, the way the points worked out, that if we had scored and won the game, we would have stayed up. And it was down to this last 5 minutes. And I don't... It's funny because over the years you see the situation unfold on the TV more than you remember it. But I just remember the crowd were just United, 10,000 people shouting, screaming, but this air of acceptance that probably they're about to get relegated. Yeah. But they're still shouting United, and it all came down essentially to the last kick, the last corner. And afterwards, David Brightwell's told us that, when he was running up, he said to the ref, how long? And he said, this is it.
Right, last kick of the game.
Basically, yeah. And I remember I pumped a ball forward and it ricocheted off a couple of people, went out for a corner. Scott Dobie took the corner. And I'm looking across thinking, because over the years, I'm a frustrated centre forward. I've never hidden that. The day before in training, I scored a hat-trick, running around in the five-a-sides. I didn't put my gloves on, I don't think, once. Maybe we did the set pieces. So I've always been a frustrated centre forward. But the truth of the matter is I'm not a frustrated centre forward. I'm actually a centre forward.
Who played professionally as a goalkeeper.
Who played professionally as a goalkeeper. But I'm actually a centre forward. And the reason I say that is because, and this is going to sound crazy, the only time I was ever truly confident on a football pitch, truly confident, was when I played on pitch, when I played up front. Wow. As a goalkeeper, I was always nervous, although I hit it well at times, probably not so well other times. But the only time I was actually truly confident and probably happy was when I was playing on pitch. For whatever reason, I just had this belief that I could just score goals. And they could be 30 yards or a 2-yard tackling, or I just had this. And whether it's because I'd played for many years in goal and you understand what beats you, or whether, I'm not sure what it was. And people laugh at me when I say it. But I generally...
Goalkeeper that can play with his feet, you'd have made it in the modern game.
Well, that's just a whole new irony there. I mean, who wants to earn £100 a week anyway? But I just felt like I had this ability to score goals, and whenever I walked onto a football pitch, even as a goalkeeper, I just had the belief I would score, or I'd try to score. I remember we had a free kick once at Bournemouth in the middle of our own half, and I used to kick a ball quite well. I remember literally just beating Chris Woods when we played Burnley. Like, it literally just went past the top corner where I just saw him off his line. And I remember Willow told me, Mel Machin turned around to Willow, "Oh, did he just shoot them, Willow? Did he just shoot?" Like, desperate to. And Willow's like, no, I don't think he did, no. No, he didn't, Gaffer. Sorry about my Mel Machin impression. And so basically it came down to this last 10 seconds. So I started to run up the pitch. Again, probably the nervous part of me looked across at the manager for permission. And I think that kind of summed up my character in some ways.
Yeah.
You know, I think I was
slightly unsure of himself.
I was always a little bit unsure. Yeah, and Nigel Pearson's just waving me up. He's like, "You might as well."
Go.
Well, in his own words, he says, "You might as well go on. You might as well, son." And then I suppose instinct takes over, and the corner comes in, and all I know is whenever I dropped a cross or a corner in the 6-yard box, there was someone there to tap it in and make me look stupid. So my understanding of the two boxes, like I've said, is, you know, all the action happens in certain places. So I just headed for the centre of the 6-yard box, and the corner come in. Scott Dobie had a great, powerful header at the near post, but straight at the keeper. But as I arrived across the penalty spot, I just saw the 6-yard box just open up, literally just open up, and there was no one in it. And James Dungy, the keeper, just kind of parried it, and it just fell to me. And I just arrived in the 6-yard box on my own. It just fell to my right foot, 6 yards out. Then I just volleyed it in the bottom corner. I'd always like to joke it'd still be rolling now if I had anything in there. But and you know, that moment was just listen, for the 10,000 Carlisle fans and the 100,000 in the town, it was a phenomenal moment in their history, and they remember it fondly. For football, it was a fond moment. I think it really.
It's one of those that gets replayed even now, doesn't it?
Well, it kind of throws up the romance of the game and how special this game is and why it's so special. You know, ultimately, the goal isn't about me. I was just part of it. Yeah. And Eddie always laughs when I say this. You know, it's football's goal, and that's why it's lived on in over history, the decades. Yeah. You know, it's obviously 24 years this year. You know, Sky did a documentary about it a couple of years ago, which I was really proud of, which was a really good documentary. But it was football's goal, and I was a part of it. But I think the crazy thing is, and the irony, as I look back over the years, and again, I've said this before, and people sort of tat on me, but I probably didn't deserve a fantastic football career, because although I love football, I didn't put enough work in or effort. I wasn't in charge of or manage my mindset that well. And years later, I realised that. You know, I instead of looking for people to help me become a footballer, I should have just done it myself and found a way forward, found a way to be the best version of myself.
And I suppose in that period of football, there was certain players that started to do that, didn't they?
Yeah,
Gareth Southgates of this world.
You just, because you had to, ultimately. If
there was nobody else going to do it for you.
No, you have to do it yourself. You can find all the excuses in the world why to fail. There's loads of them. But can you find the desire and the mental strength to succeed? That's the hard bit, but it's achievable if you understand it. And I think, looking back over my career, again, this is all a little bit romantic, and I'm not a great believer in fate. I'm not a spiritual person. But I love football, and I did put in a good shift at times, and I tried hard when I was a young footballer, and I'd come up against injuries, and I come up against setbacks, and I kept going. I come up against dodgy managers, and I kept going just for the love of the game, and to try and succeed and try and get that glory, I suppose. So I think what football did in the end, it didn't give me a career. It didn't give me 500 league games in the international career, but it gave me a moment.
Yeah. And the irony is, from someone that spent his whole life not knowing if he was a goalkeeper or a centre forward, the irony is it gave me a moment as a goalkeeper scoring a goal. Yeah.
You know, so it was a phenomenal moment in my life. I've had some ups and downs, many ups and downs, if I'm honest, and still do. But it was a phenomenal moment that I'm eternally grateful for.
Yeah, I was going to say, one of the questions I wanted to ask you was how you felt, but I think you've answered it really. How did you feel like that small moment of fame has defined you as an individual? Does it ever frustrate you that that's that's the defined moment of Jimmy Glass as a professional footballer?
Yeah, I mean, it did. When I was struggling, my years of struggling, soon after that, I found myself out of a contract and I couldn't work out. I'm suddenly from the back pages of every sporting paper in the world to not being able to get a game or not being able to get a contract. For many years, sat in my taxi in the early days when I was struggling with my gambling and young family and trying to survive in the real world without any, what I felt at the time, real skills, although again, that was a mindset thing because I clearly did. But had no self-belief or self-confidence. My career had disintegrated in front of me from a moment of elation and unbelievable fame to literally 2 years later. I'm going to the I think I went to a an employment company in Bournemouth, and she said, "Well, you can do some box packing in a warehouse, I then went to work Spire Technology in Verwood for some guys, and they kind of got me into the working world. And, good friends, some of them still. But ultimately, I didn't achieve what I wanted to achieve as a footballer. And that was purely because of my mindset. It wasn't because of ability. I know that for a fact. Because when I went back to Bournemouth in the last 8 years, I was training up until about 2 years ago still, diving around and training with the first team, with Ed. And actually probably a better goalkeeper because of to Neil Moss and Gareth Stewart and people I've then worked with. It's ridiculous when you think about it.
It's ironic somehow.
I'm 45 and the first time I'm getting any goalkeeping coaching. I think for many years I felt the goal was an albatross. Yeah. Because it turned me into a bit of a circus. Yeah. It turned Jimmy Glass into...
Wherever you went.
It was a bit of a circus. Even after I scored for a couple of years, I'm trying to find a club, trying to find a game, but you're just up against, go on Jimmy, run up the pitch, go on. Every change room you walk into, you're Jimmy Glass. Oh, you're the guy that's got to go, yeah. It kind of detracted. But then I think, if I'm truly honest, my career was on the way down before I scored the goal. So like I say before, I'm eternally grateful. If football felt I deserved a moment, it certainly gave me more.
Definitely. And a couple of questions just to start to round up our conversation, and we can talk about Wimborne Town. But if you could go back to that 15-year-old signing a YTS contract at Crystal Palace, with everything you've learned, the journey that you've now been on, what words of wisdom would you give? What piece of advice would you give that 15-year-old?
Well, do you know what? It's kind of every 15-year-old, really. Because this isn't really a football thing. Only allow people you truly respect and love to affect your emotions.
Beautiful. Love that.
Because I'm not saying other people don't deserve to, but only allow people you respect and love to affect your emotions. Everyone else, just leave them to it. Be yourself, know yourself, and try to become the best version of yourself. And this isn't about football. It's just in general for everybody. It's
about life.
And if you'd find people wouldn't be plagued with their emotional problems and their addictions and things like that. If someone at a young age took a young, unsure boy or girl and just taught them that and could get that through to them. Yeah. Because if you manage your emotions and you manage your mindset, probably more importantly, well, no, as importantly, not more important, because your emotions can really dictate your life if you let them. We can talk about the chimp paradox and things like that, but ultimately, if you want to find the truth to mindset and mentality, that's probably one of the best ones.
It's a great book.
Well, it does, because what it also shows, your emotions are really, really, really important. Yeah. They're massively important. Yeah.
You can't ignore them, can you?
Well, you can't.
And if you do ignore them, that's extremely dangerous.
But they are to be managed.
Yeah.
In certain places,
agreed.
Let them loose. Yeah. Enjoy life. Love, passion, all these things are brilliant. But they are to be managed. And if you can manage your emotions, and not... Funny, my psychologist taught me this, and when I'd use the word control, he said, no, we don't control anything. Yeah. No one wants to control anything. You want to manage them. Yeah. And initially I didn't really understand that, but I was on a journey, and now I do. You manage everything. You know, if you can manage your emotions and therefore manage your self-belief and not let things get to you that don't deserve to get to you, then you've got a good chance.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jimmy. Great advice. I'm listening myself. You're now at Wimborne Town. We're sat in this fantastic facility. Obviously, games being kinder to you second time round, you made the most of the opportunity that presented itself. 6 months so ago, you took the decision to leave Bournemouth and come to Wimborne Town as a general manager. What were the reasons behind that?
It's a really difficult decision because I love Bournemouth. I love Bournemouth when I played there. I was really sad to leave. I love the area. And when I say Bournemouth, obviously I mean Poole, I mean Wimborne.
Yeah, the wider conurbation and
just
everything.
The whole place. You know, again, I grew up in London, never thought I'd leave. You know, I can't imagine living anywhere else now. It's such a beautiful place to be. But Bournemouth Football Club, what they achieved, and I got on that journey later when they got into the Premier League, but what they achieved with Ed and JT and Tinney, Simon Weatherstone, by the way, for anyone who don't know, Stephen Purchase, Neil Moss, obviously Fletch, everyone else involved with the club, what they achieved for me was just a thing of beauty. You know, it was like a shining light in football for me. But in Ed's words, you know, at some point it was always going to come to an end because it burnt Ed out, to be fair. It absorbed, it took so much of his ability and his mindset.
He's been really honest about that, hasn't he? There's a great podcast, the High Performance Podcast, where he speaks really openly about it. It's a great listen.
And do you know what the truth is? And I love Ed, and I think he's phenomenal. But we could all see it. It was taking too much of him. Yeah. And because it did. Because when you're truly overachieving to the level what AFC Bournemouth had done at that point. Yeah. And what they did there was put in place the foundations for what you're now seeing at AFC Bournemouth. Getting into the Premier League's one thing, phenomenal achievement. Staying there for 5 years, and then giving the club the opportunity to create the foundations. Now, I don't mean so much as obviously the training pitch hadn't been built, the stadium's still not owned, but the club got a financial foundation. Yeah,
and an ethos about it, didn't it?
Yeah.
And a belief, even, you know, without him there.
Yeah, it did. I think when it went down, it wobbled and it took its time to establish itself. But it was there. You know, when you fall out of the Premier League, you've got 2 seasons. Yeah. If you don't get back in those 2 seasons, the financial implications mean it's very, very, very difficult. To unless someone's going to put in a lot of money, which you can't always because of financial fair play and stuff like that. It's very difficult to get yourself back up, and they did it on the second go. And then obviously Gary O'Neill done a phenomenal job last year to keep them up with the help of Tommy and Coops. And then the new lad Ariella stepped in. And it was difficult to start the season, but I think you're starting to see the foundations that were in place now, and you're starting to see.
Well, the results are certainly coming, aren't they? And the style of play is coming.
Yeah, it is, and you've got. I mean, I can't speak highly enough of obviously some of the players. Neto, what a phenomenal signing, and he's a good friend of mine, and people are going to think this is a bit, but he's just a phenomenal character. I can't tell you. From a mentality point of view, how lucky they are to have Neto as captain. I know he had a wobble and the fans started to pick on him, but ultimately it wasn't a wobble. It's just that's what happens when results aren't going your way, that people start to look to
come back playing with confidence, though, doesn't it? Which
it
proves probably a sense of resilience and mindset again, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, but I don't think it's Neto. I think it's 2 centre halves, it's Marcus and Ilya. You know, that the whole team. You start to see Adam Smith back in the side, and the whole team's now started to. I mean, there's probably not much change behind the scenes, but suddenly you get that win, and there's some real good quality players there. They've signed some really good quality players. So you get that win, you get that bit of confidence, sometimes a bit of luck here and there. Yeah, but let's put no too fine a point in it. I mean, had they not conceded in the 90th minute against Aston Villa, who are a very good team, Bournemouth would have won the last 5 games on the bounce in the Premier League. Now, they've never done that.
It's unheard of, isn't it?
As brilliant as Ed was and is, even Ed never did that.
No.
you know, and the reasons. I mean, and again, you're not, you know, you're beating Man United, you're beating Newcastle. You know, obviously Sheffield United are struggling, but they go there and convincingly beat Sheffield United. You know, there's some really good, solid performances going into that. And the club now, you're starting to see, hopefully, what the club is going to become. Yeah. Obviously, new owners. They're doing it very differently to the way it was before. And that's fine. If you're going to come in and pump 300-400 million into a football club, you should be able to do whatever you want. Yeah. And I just think now they've got a belief with the manager and the owners, and it's starting to gel for them. It's really great to see, because I love Bournemouth. And so it was a really difficult decision at the start of the season for me to step away. But I think for me, I'd achieved everything I could achieve at Bournemouth. You know, because I never coached, because I haven't got coaching badges, and because probably the nature of who I am and my career, you know, I wanted to go in there and not run the football club, but be an integral part in how it was run. And with Eddie, I was, to a degree. Yeah. You know, I was in charge of all logistics and where we went and how we got there and trips and players' lives. And
so you were really making that contribution.
Yeah, I was, and I was kind of Ed's voice in the community, Ed's voice in the commercial department, Ed's voice connecting the media and stuff, you know. And that was what I wanted to do, because I believed I could do that. I believed that I had that through my own experiences. I had something to put back into the club. When I left, that changed quite dramatically for me. And I've not left on any, you know, I wish them all luck, and not left under any sort of bad karma with any of the guys. It was just time for me to step down. Yeah. And it came at a time when I was speaking to Martin Higgins from MSB Capital about something else completely, actually. And I knew he'd been involved with Wimborne for a season, and I've got a good friend here, Graham Bell, who's one of the directors of Wimborne, that's supported the club for many years. And he kept telling me to come down and look what was happening. They've got this new Granby built for them by Wyatt Homes. Yeah. Davey wanted to build some big houses down by the river. And the council said, okay, you can do that, but you've got to build a stadium for the football club. It's been in the town since 1878, by the way. It's incredible. Wimbledon's an old team. Yeah. So that's what he did. And he built this fantastic, basic but fantastic stadium.
It's an incredible facility, isn't it?
It is, and in the non-league circles, local non-league circles, with like St Paul Town, obviously they've done really well. They did really well under Tommy for many years, but they were always limited by their ground.
They just kept hitting that ceiling, didn't they?
Yeah, because you can't, you know, there's other things you need, because they would have had benefactors putting money in, and you can get a certain level with benefactors, but what you need to be able to do as a football club, and this is them, I'll tell you how I got involved, but this is the ethos. I know as a football club, you've got to make money Monday to Friday. Yeah. You have to make money Monday to Friday as a football club. If you've got a benefactor, that should be a bonus. It can't be the whole ethos.
That's the cream on the top.
Yeah, it can't be the whole ethos of the club, how it's going to succeed. So basically speaking, I came in here, I looked at the facilities, because Martin and I sat down, we were talking about something completely different. Like I said, I told him about my time at Bournemouth. He told me about why he'd got involved with Wimborne Town, and I could see the passion in his eyes. And I won't tell you too much about Martin, because he's quite a private person.
Well, he's going to be a guest on the podcast in a few weeks.
Is he? Fantastic. You can ask him yourself.
Yeah.
But he's a very driven guy, a very smart guy.
Amazing individual.
You know, done really well for himself in a decent way. You know, there's nothing shady about a business. No. Very solid business, very well respected. And he's just developed this passion for grassroots football, for non-league football. And he's had a box at Bournemouth over the years.
He's been shirt sponsors.
He has been shirt sponsors.
He's been at that end of the game as well.
And he could be anywhere in the world he wanted.
Yeah.
But he a couple of weeks ago, he's at Cribs away to watch us get beat, which wasn't great. But he goes everywhere. Yeah. He goes everywhere with his daughter, and they go and watch home and away. And that's the passion that I love.
Right.
You know, if I know someone's at the helm but can't kind of on a day-to-day basis, and he would if he had a chance. If he could, he'd be here every day trying to do something. You know, but he needed someone to step in and try and, I suppose, implement his visualisation of what he wanted Wimborne to be.
Ignite kind of some of those ideas.
Yeah, essentially.
Bring some things to fruition.
Yeah, and from our conversation, he realised that I felt the same way.
Yeah.
And so this was an opportunity for me to drop 8 leagues. That's what I always say, drop 8 leagues, and a little shiver goes down my
Nearly
spine.
as dramatic as falling out of the game and becoming a taxi driver,
Nearly,
Jimmy.
yeah. I mean, I do seem to travel the spectrum of experiences. But basically, it's just such a phenomenal opportunity.
Yeah.
Now, I see Wimborne Town, I see what it is, and I see what it can become. One of the directors, a couple of directors were generous enough to build them a 3G training pitch, literally next door to anyone that's not been to Wimborne's got a great main grass pitch, which is well looked after by Steve Berry. He also works at Bournemouth as well. But they've got a full-size 3G pitch next to it, floodlit, both of them obviously. It's just a phenomenal facility. Now, when you've got that facility and you've got the opportunity, you've got to grab the ball and run with it. You literally got to take it as far as you can take it.
Yeah.
You know, you don't sit back and go, "Oh, we're doing all right. We're much better than that club, or much better." You literally got to go, "How good can we be?
Yeah.
Where can we go?" Now, for me, it's not unreasonable, and there are lots of different things to overcome and lots of different ways. But it's not unreasonable to consider that this club in the next 4 or 5 years could be a sustainable, and that's the word, sustainable, National South club.
Yeah.
At least.
Wow.
At least.
And there's clubs that have done it, like Dorking, isn't there?
There are clubs that have done it, yeah.
Yeah.
And
there is
again,
a roadmap towards it, I suppose.
well, you can do it, like I say, there's 2 ways of doing it. You can
Right.
do it via a benefactor,
Yeah.
but the problem with that is there's
It's
no...
his ball. When he wants to take his ball
It
away.
is. There's no sustainability
No.
to it. And Martin's not that character, but ultimately, you know...
You've got the support of the character and you've got the
You do.
infrastructure to build a business around.
Basically. So what we're planning here at Wimborne Town is to create revenue streams Monday to Friday. I won't give too much away, but we're going to try to develop the club so that we can offer the local community things they need,
Yeah.
which will give us the money we need to become a sustainable National South club.
Brilliant.
On top of that, our reserve team, and when I came here, and it's quite common in football, our reserve team and our first team were kind of disconnected, because generally speaking, your managers come into non-league clubs like this and they'll just focus on the first team, because that is essentially where the success has to be. But I would like Wimborne Town, and I think the board understand that I want them to be an old-style football club. I want a youth team, a reserve team and a first team, like I grew up in. And there's a reason for that. And it's not always economically viable to certain clubs, and I get why the reserve teams have kind of fallen away.
Yeah.
But for me, we need to create a pathway right the way from our under-6s. And bear in mind, we have 34 youth teams at Wimborne Town. 34 youth teams, which has, I think, grown in the last 4 or 5 years from something like 5. We have 7 development squads. We have an academy now of young 16 to 18-year-olds doing their BTEC in sport course and training every day, playing matches. Next year we're going to take. I think we've got 15 at the moment. Next year we're going to take on another 25. We'll have 40 youngsters here every day doing their BTEC.
Wow.
So the plan is to create a pathway all the way through from under 6s.
Yeah.
To be the best club outside the Vitality, by far.
Brilliant.
And then you'll see Wimborne be able to elevate itself into the National South.
And it can make those steps.
Yeah. Now you have to do things to create that. Like I say, you can throw a bucket of money at it and take this club in National South, but there's no sustainability to it. And Martin understands that. And the board understand that. It's really important that we've got a great board here of people that love the club. There's some people here that have put money into the club for years, kept it alive,
sustained it
when it could have gone. And I'm glad now that they're seeing the fruits of their efforts as well. But the team's top of the league, the reserve team are top of the league as well at the moment in DPL. Next year we're going to push the reserve team into the Wessex League.
Okay.
So you'll have, the thoughts are in a couple of seasons' time, 2 or 3 seasons' time, you'll have a National South club playing there and probably a Wessex Premier League team playing there. So every Saturday you could come to Wimborne Town and watch either a National South game or a Wessex Prem game. And that's not even touching on the fact you can come watch the AFC Bournemouth development squad now at Wimborne Town, come and play their home games.
Yeah, that connection's back.
Well, it is, because one of the things I realised was that Bournemouth are building their training facility 2 miles up the road, their £50 million training facility. They've got big ideas, obviously, and big dreams for that. To have a National South team 2 miles away from the training ground
makes a lot of sense.
Is a massive plus for Bournemouth.
But again, it's been a big change in your life. We've touched on that. What have you learned about yourself? Just as we wrap up the conversation, Jimmy, what have you learned about yourself in the last 6 months?
It's funny enough, you touched on it earlier, that my life seems to take this sort of, I wouldn't call it a roller coaster, but it goes off in different directions. I think one of the main strengths I have really is I'm not scared to create a new me.
Yeah.
Is to keep growing, hopefully.
But that moment you step off the cliff to create a new you is a daunting moment, isn't it? Yeah,
of course it is. It's nervous, it's nerve-wracking, but you have to trust yourself, you have to trust your skill sets. When I was young, I didn't.
No.
I spent the last 8 years in a very, very, very progressive growth mindset environment with Ed and all the boys at Bournemouth. And I realised that unless you actually have a go at life and you try to achieve, then you won't. And I'd like to try and bring that here to Wimborne Town, because it's got a phenomenal opportunity. There's phenomenal people here. And I'm really excited about being part of it.
Brilliant. Final question on the podcast that I always ask, and I think we've touched on this during the course of the conversation, but I am going to ask the question: what's your personal definition of success, Jimmy, with everything you've learned in life?
Ultimately, when you get away from all the money and all the fame and all the different relationships you have in your life and the different loves and that, ultimately I think what success is contentment. It's waking up in the morning content with your life and not feeling like you're chasing something or you've lost something, or you just wake up and you go, things are good.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you for being so open, honest, being so self-aware, and sharing some of those life experiences that you've had with our listeners. Thank you for being an incredible guest.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Evolve to Succeed podcast. My hope with every episode is that you've learned something new or heard something that challenged your way of thinking and further motivated you on your path towards becoming a more knowledgeable, informed and inspired individual and business leader. And don't forget, if you'd like to learn more about Evolve and the services we offer and how we can help you and your business confidently start, grow and exit, then please go to evolveadvisory.co.uk. Please also help and support this podcast by subscribing, liking and giving us a positive review on your favourite listening platform. Thanks for listening and see you next week.